Hello, hello, hi, good afternoon. I hope everyone's had a good lunch, and thanks for joining us this Sunday afternoon. My name is Kenneth. I'm assistant curator at SAM, where I'm normally found. I've been really lucky and privileged enough to have worked on the curatorial team for Living Pictures Photography in Southeast Asia, together with some wonderful colleagues and friends, such as Charmaine, Roger, Roy, and Z. So I just want to give a shout out to them. Some of them are here with us. Can you hear me at the back okay? Okay, cool. So I'm just going to start really with some quick prefatory remarks for today's session before introducing our two very special speakers beside me. Today's session will be, I hope, quite an informal one. Having spent the last 6 months, I would say, giving exhibition tours of living pictures, I've come to realize that, for those of you who have not seen the show, of course, you'll find that the early section of the show, where it begins somewhere in the mid-1800s, you see a lot of mobile itinerant photographers who came largely by way of Europe to take images of the people and the landscape in this part of the world. And as they go about, setting up studios, making prints and selling postcards back home, it seems like, somehow their bodies and their images are able to circulate quite freely across the world, while their Southeast Asian subjects remain somewhat rooted and fixed in a particular time and place, which is to say a kind of developmental time before modernity as well as its visual technologies. This, of course, changes as you make your way towards the end of the show, especially when you encounter contemporary artists working on and from the region. You'll see that this asymmetry between the movement and circulation of images is no longer quite as stark as before. And this is clearly the result of changing media conditions. What we have 100 years ago is clearly different from what we have now. Today, we can even perhaps say that there are just as many producers of photography as there are consumers of photography. And today over lunch, together with Wawi and Miti, we were even talking at one point about non-human producers of photography these days in international photo competitions, ChatGPT or what have you. But maybe that's a topic that's left for another day. But in sum, we can say that the movement and circulation of photography is no longer the same geography as we had before. And what happens when the itinerant photographer is now herself the subject? Or when the circulation of images is no longer limited to postcards and prints exchanged between the colonial center and its periphery, but rather floating around aimlessly and vulnerably across the internet. Yeah. And for this, I'm joined by two very special guests, Wawi Navarroza, seated immediately to my left, and Miti Ruangkritya. Both of them have flown respectively from Manila and Bangkok to be with us today. And so I'll just give a quick introduction of them both before passing the time over. Wawi Navarroza, seated on my left, is a Filipina contemporary artist whose work navigates self and surrounding as seen in her self-portraits, landscapes, and installations. She's informed by tropicality within the dynamics of post-colonial dialogue, globalization, and the artist as a transnational agent. Her works are surveyed in numerous books, including Photography Today, published by Phaidon in 2014, as well as Contemporary Photography in Asia, published by Presto in 2013. I'm also happy to say that she's also currently nominated for the 2023 edition of the Leica Oscar Barnack Award, the results of which will be announced in September. So I hope you'll join me in wishing her the very best for that. And then I'll move on to Miti. Miti, seated on the other side, is a visual artist whose practice incorporates video, text, and publishing to address topics ranging from political upheaval and ecological change to dislocation and economic inequalities. His utilization of media beyond traditional digital and film photography really elucidates the nature of image generation, presentation, and consumption in a world increasingly defined by the visual experience. And I'm also happy to actually announce that Miti has just opened a new show earlier last month called Bliss in Arts Center Silpakon University. So congratulations, Miti. As a treat, he'll be sharing a little bit about that show. And so I hope that this is also an extended invitation for you to come to Bangkok sometime soon. Okay, so for today's proceedings, we'll have Wawi present first with some background and context on her practice before focusing on the series, Self-Portraits and the Tropical Gothic, two of which you will see in living pictures if you haven't already. Then we're followed by Miti, who's going to give us a nice run through his practice, leading up to the series Thai Politics, two of which are also viewable at living pictures. We'll then have a quick conversation between us three before opening up to the floor. This will take some time between an hour 15. Yeah. And so with that, I'm going to pass the time over first to Wawi and then to Miti. So thank you.
Hi. It's nice to see the room is full. Thank you for inviting me. I flew in from Manila yesterday, and this show has been such a good part of 2 years. And being here means a lot. So thank you all for coming. So, wait. There. It's true, art can take you places. I could say my path as an artist reflects the trajectory of young artists studying, emerging, then taking opportunities as it opened in the form of scholarships, then grants, then residencies, exhibitions, traveling, seeing the world, knowing the world, and the string of life events that meant a lot of moving, packing, unpacking, moving again, and being in that constant point of finding yourself in other places. So questioning where you are and who you have been and what you've become along the way. The artist is peripatetic in that sense. Not only me, it's a condition of being an artist in contemporary times. All of us have gone through this trajectory. And even if I look at the history of our national artists in the Philippines, it's the same. Scholarships abroad, grants, exhibitions, commissions of here and there, and then you end up accumulating different things from different places, melding it to your own, shedding a few, learning and unlearning at the same time. And so I've come to accept that identity is plural, at least in my perspective. It is built in layers, it's built in years, it's built in experience. So these two words, after 2 decades of my art practice, mainly using photography, I find myself coming back to these two. As a young artist, I've always struggled to answer the question, what is your subject? Because that's the question that you ask photographers. You don't ask that for painters and sculptors, but what is your subject? You know, it seems that there's a template, right? Like portrait, landscape, still life. So this is my response. At the moment, I finally found these two words, self and surrounding. I've always come back to contemplating these two, like vacillating from these two. The images of my work are a result of my lived experience, always through a prism of myself being a woman, a Southeast Asian, a Filipina, transnational, and a post-colonial, globalized, hybrid, mutant, contaminated person. And that is, I guess, you know, the chunk of it that is rarely said, but that's true. So this what you've seen in the monitor, it's just a rough timeline. So 2007, I was already making self-portraits, and this was taken by a pinhole camera. I was doing black and white, and in between that, I would say there was homage for Frida Kahlo that really was well received, given that it was Frida. But then I thought that I wouldn't want my career to stand on her shadow, so I left self-portraits. And then you could see that there was a missing link, and I did a lot of landscape and I left the dark room for digital color, and in 2011 I was doing landscapes up until 2017. And now, 2022, on the right, you'd see it seems that the girl who took the black and white portrait is back, but she's colorful. And yeah, she's embraced the extraness of being everything all at once. So yeah, just a rough introduction, sampler how my landscape looked. It reflects the education that I had in my master's in Madrid. It's contemporary photography, or in Spanish we call it fotografía de autor. Very European, and my teachers were all practicing photographers from England, new topographics from the Dusseldorf School. And so I can see now that it kind of seeped into the work. So I was accumulating that, and I was, yeah, very sterile, and my landscape almost looked like Zaurenoi here. And that was, what year was that? 2013 and 2014. So my landscapes were from every time that something happened in the studio. Just a context that my studio was destroyed by a typhoon. I abandoned the studio, and the next day I headed to the volcanoes. And this is what was born, what you see. It's from the series Dominion. When something happens externally, I turn to the outdoors and the big nature for answers. Then I turn inwards and make self-portraits to reflect on what happened. So there's that kind of back and forth between nature, the grandness of it, the sublimeness of it, the surrendering to the forces that seem to impress upon us that is larger than us. And then later on, I would find myself years down the line thinking about the same thing and processing it, not with an external object, but rather going inside. So it's a little bit difficult to, how do you paint a picture of something that is internal? And these are reflected and expressed in the self-portraits. So in this period that you see, 2011 to 2019, I would have done a long residency in New York and came back, and then I would have done my master's in Spain, then came back. A lot of transplantings, a lot of rerouting, a lot of push and pull. So this is the major turning point. And Ken asked me about this. He said that, can I just read your question? So, Wawi, this self-portrait series marked not just your return to a studio-based practice in Manila, but also return to self-portraits as well. Could you share with us what happened that led you and your practice to be much more mobile and itinerant in the years between? Also, what compelled you to return to self-portraits? So, like I said, I abandoned it because I didn't want to. I thought that it was too easy in that sense to ride the wave of an artist, contemporary artist, known for Frida works, doing self-portraits, and it was always that. And there's also a strain of what, is it vanity? Is it self-indulgent to do a self-portrait? Is it to a lot of navel-gazing? Why the self? Why not the bigger issues of humanity? Why not the stories that meant, But then, because of the things that were happening externally from the fire that happened, this is after the fire, the red one. I forgot to mention that this was my studio. Not only was destroyed by typhoon, 2 years down the line, my studio again got destroyed by fire. And 2 years after that, when I finally had a studio, I took this self-portrait called The Fire You're Made Of, Ignis Mirabilis, Self-Portrait After the Fire. So to answer Ken's question, I was doing landscape because I didn't have a studio. My eyes were, I stepped out of the studio and into the world, into living in suitcase and into making a project in an island with marble. So only 2019 I would have a studio again. So coming back to the studio is coming back to myself. And seeing a lot of places taught me a lot about unlearning things that I thought were essential for us to understand that we are not only, we're reliving, sort of, we need to unlearn the things that were conditioned to us, especially about identity. So what I did was I reclaimed identity by using the same exotic tropes and turning it back around. I went back to my immediate surroundings, which are the markets, the streets, and the way of life growing up in Manila, my folk memory, as a way to decolonize, empower, and to remember. Because I was trying to measure, engage sophistication, modernity in the way that I approach the medium as something that's like a recognizable, but then there's a huge part of me that wasn't being seen in the photos. So finally, I'm showing the colors, the flowers, the artificial, the messiness, the extraness, the tropical, the tropicality, the heat, the life, the disease, possible danger. So I had dengue in Bali when I was doing residency, and this was here I would finally embrace the colors. And I was also working on a project that was in dialogue with Murniasi. If you're familiar with Murni's work, the colors are just amazing because she had a background with textiles, working in a fabric factory. So there, being face to face with life and death in a tropical place, I got the disease because as I was working with plants, so I was bitten by a mosquito, and then I got healed because of plants as well. They were giving me roots and concoctions made out of all these jamu. So, yes. The Tropical Gothic. Now, the 2019 series is called Tropical Gothic, Self-Portraits in the Tropical Gothic, because it's a wonderful way to summarize what Filipino identity is. And here I've written what writer Carmen Guerrero Nakpil would describe our history as summarized as 300 years in the convent and 50 in Hollywood. Because we're a colony of Spain for 300 years, and then a colony of the United States for 50 years, not to mention a brief from Japan. So in a way, that would impact the identity of, as a post-colonial, children of the post-colony, we are a melange of this syncretic mix of Catholic, mystic, pagan, Western influence, Pan-Asian, and also indigenous. So that term, Tropical Gothic, is coined by our national artist for literature, Nick Joaquin, in his book called The Tropical Gothic, and I've used it in my series to describe this too muchness, this horror vacui. This seems to be like, this is what we see in Manila. And I guess not only Manila, very Southeast Asian, even Mexican, even India or global South. Now I've come to see this as a mashup of iconographies, not just of remnants of a Catholic Baroque hangover, but there's contemporary clutter and a lexicon of signifiers, almost choose your own adventure. As Filipinos, we know this since we are a pastiche and we love color and filling up every space that we could find. And that's reflected in our sari-sari stores. So what you see here is from my parents' province in Leyte, and they would make this set up every year during the fiesta. And it would impact my work a lot, and you'd see there. So I've been asked, especially with when I'm shown abroad, they'd ask me, "Is your work kitsch? Are you doing kitsch work?" My response would be, kitsch is not a stylistic choice that I do. It's my cultural background. Is it still kitsch if it's like that? So I honestly, don't dwell on that, but just to visit this briefly. I play with kitsch, but only in the respect to the reality of Asian and global South markets where these items render globalism mass production. It's woven into the reading of tableaus in my photography because photography always requires physical materials. I have to get it from somewhere. It has to be taken from material. Whereas if you're a painter, you could paint it out of your imagination. Yes, so this is this. And I'm remembering my roots, my parents' hometown in Leyte, and I've started infusing all these in my work. This is in 2019, just before the pandemic. That was the last show I would do before the pandemic. I would use the actual material within the tableau, and I will also intervene on the framing. So what you see in front of you is the object that you see in the photo. So again, the material that was there. What do you call that? Translated into the here and now. Yeah, and even the framing here is described as tinted to my skin tone. So the brown here is the brown of my skin, more or less. But then you would understand how photography is tricky because if you light it a certain way, the skin looks lighter, depending on the lighting. La Bruja is from the series. It's called All the Places She's Been. Again, addressing the images on the run, right? All the places she's been. After being so many places, what do you want to do? You just want to lie down. Honestly, right? It's just lying down. But it connotes as well, the Filipinos are there's always an association with domestic work. Wherever you go in Europe, the United States, everywhere, there are Filipinos working in the domestic front. So here, depending on the viewer, and I like this generosity with the work, is that it changes, vacillates depending on the viewer and depending on the location where it's shown. So here, she could be seen as a Matisse, odalisque, which is a favorite trope of the West that they've been using to, fascination for the exotic. But if you're from here, you're also a reclining Buddha. She's a reclining Buddha. And I've seen it in Thailand, the Buddha. Yes, I'm not laughing at the Buddha, but it would be like far from the association, right, when they see this image. So to me, the image here of La Bruja, she is resting, she's unfazed, she is comfortable, and she's neither the master nor the slave. She is her own. And I guess that's how I approach identity at the moment. We are our own sovereign. Wherever we go, we carry our bodies, we carry our own self-made mixture of these hybridities. And briefly, so if we take the anatomy of an image, of a tableau, how I make my tableau is like writing in code, but not in AI code, but not in binary code, but through materials. So there's Tinalak from a Mindanao Philippine tribe in the south. There's Abel from the north of the Philippines. There's Poleng from Bali. There's cheap satin from the market. There's Spanish fan. There's upcycled basahan, which is the rugs that we have in the Philippines. There's ukay-ukay, which is pre-loved clothing that you get in bulks from other countries. And then in the Philippines, there's a profusion of that. And then there's textile from Dutch wax block print. So that's how an image is born for me. It's like my brain is just layers and layers of references. So this image I'd like to share is continuing that we are children of the post-colony in the Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia. We've been bent out of shape growing up in the general culture where our perception of what is considered the ideal is that of a fair-skinned, blonde, blue-eyed, white foreigner, that to be native is to be undesirable and inferior, at least in appearance sake. All our ads have to do with skin whitening, uh, all of that. I guess we all know this, living in the region. And self-image that aspires to be what you're not and to measure up to that sophisticated, that modern idea. But fortunately, things are changing now, and we are now in a pivotal shift in which we are unlearning a lot of these things and reclaiming our own culture. And we are, in fact, more proud to stand, like, for who we really are. And in my country, the young ones are speaking in Tagalog more. They're, wearing more traditional fabrics as well. Even in design, there's a lot of referencing to our pre-colonial or these cultures that we always had. So I'm no longer afraid to be myself, to ally myself and my practice to what is considered local, folk, or native, because it is now part of what it means to be global. And this image is a bit tongue-in-cheek because it's titled Remember Who You Are, Strange Fruit, The Other Asian, Self-Portrait with Pineapple. So, yeah, she's strange fruit, and the pineapple has 3 heads there. And this mint green, if you're in the Philippines, you would see it everywhere. From the monoblock chairs to the painting of the walls, the barber shop, even a mosque is mint green. And this is actually very interesting because the way I decolonize my work is to revisit these things I used to hate. Because these things were being signaled to me as something of a kitsch, out of taste, badui, démodé, things that don't associate me with that. So what I do is I put it in the work, front and center, to present another reading of that and to say, yes, this is where I come from, and I've learned to love what I used to not like. And it's a process. I'm still doing that. And here you see the pattern of a trapal, which you see in sari-sari stores. And it's used pretty much for everything. The pattern in the Philippines is common. And then a fashion designer, Carl John Cruz, made it into a part of his collection. And then I would wear it in my artwork. It's hinting it again, it's codes. A Filipino would know this. But probably if you haven't been there and it's not familiar, it's just a usual garment. And this is my recent 2022 work, wherein I reference Heidelin Diaz winning the gold in the Olympics 2021 in that orange position, which is a position that is used to invoke prayer from the heavens to earth. And then it's also what is used in belly dance. I'm living in Istanbul at this time, so that's also the position of the Mary figure. And it's all in the image. There's a melange of Istanbul, ancient, contemporary, Philippines, all in one. And again, the fabric that I use and that the banig, the tikar, the flooring are hints to transport you. It literally is. It only takes a pattern to take you back to memory, to take you back to time. And this pattern, Filipinos would know it. There's blanket. And in fact, another artist, Ophelia Helveson Teki, has it in her paintings. Another thing I do is here. I do self-portraits because representation of women and myself as a female artist matters a lot to me. And this is only very recent that I can say this to you, that matters a lot to me because it is both vulnerable and defiant at the same time. I would say it's one of the most bravest things that I've decided to do. I'd like to think that I'm contributing to fill in the gaps where art history needs more point of views from women, or at least shown, taken into consideration in how we see ourselves. Because it's in the paintings that we see, it's always not the women looking at themselves. So when I appropriate paintings here, I rehash paintings by male artists with women as subject because I'm interested in offering a counter proposal for a different reading. I wanted to portray the woman, recognizing herself as her own source. Like I mentioned before, she's her own. I'm both the creator and also the muse. I'm both the dreamer and I'm also the maker. So and the way I see it is that every woman is a double portrait. And here with a painting of Federico Alcuaz in 1980, a national artist of the Philippines, I redid it in 2019, and I entitled it, "The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, the Self-Portraitist," after Alcuaz. So I'm talking to art history as well. There's an ongoing dialogue to that. And I end this presentation of mine with this image that I've been seeing everywhere. Have you seen this up in the gallery and also on the walls? So those who know, you know that this is after Balthus. And Balthus is very controversial. And this image is entitled Teres Dreaming. They will say, what's up with that? Why that? Why this image? So my answer is, my curiosity in making this tableau of Teres Dreaming comes from the experience of, I know, I just hit the time. So it comes from that experience of being the other. The one that I was telling you, not me personally, but that belonging to a set of people just generally, called the other, who is the woman, who is exotic, who is far away, who is possibly misunderstood. So this piece called May in Manila, the Balthus charge is impotent because this time the subject is aware and she's awake. And the subject is the photographer. I took this. This photo was done deliberately by me, with me. And the other is enjoying herself on a hot summer day with a gin and tonic, and she photographed herself. And it just diffuses that Balthus charge in the way that was aided by photography. I occasionally refer to Western art history to turn the mirror back on itself in so many layers. It raises the questions on the hybridized Filipino identity, the female Asian body, the female body in relation to youth, sensuousness, exoticism, pleasure, and tropicality. So that's the last slide, although there's a coda. These are notes on what I've been into the past few years. And this is the set of the very recent solo exhibition that I did in London and was shown in Manila only this year. After the pandemic and after also moving to Istanbul from Manila and also giving birth in the middle of pandemic and now finding myself a mother and also an artist. So this is my portraits, which is meant not just for me but for everybody to reflect on. Salamat. Thank you.
Thanks, Wawi. I just wanted to share a quick note before I pass the time over to Miti. I've given a tour before to a bunch of, I would say, maybe Gen Zs, who kind of gathered around one of your prints, May in Manila, and they were taking lots of photos with it. And I kind of, out of curiosity, I mean, as a millennial, I suppose, I just kind of went up to them and asked them, like, what is it about this image that appeals to you so much? And they kind of gave me an answer, which I guess is the most Gen Z answer, which is that it's so memeable. Because to them, it's like the hot girl summer, right? And so they were taking all these like liberties with the images, and I think that's, yeah, it's so memeable to them somehow. And talking on the subject of memes, then, it's kind of a nice way to segue eventually to Miti's practice, which you'll see in a bit. And with that, I pass the time over to Miti.
Thank you. Hi. I'm Miti Ruangkritya. I'm from Bangkok, Thailand. I'm just going to go through quickly on the two main aspects of my work. The first is rooted in traditional lens-based media through photography and video. My work is a personal reflection on the rapid changes within the city by examining the man-made landscape in the midst of change. Examples of these are found in Imagining Flood 2011, which portrayed a city submerged in floodwaters at night without any human presence. And Space Shift, which was made in the same year, portrayed, which is a project of a converted temporary housing units during the flood. Other works such as Empty Lot 2014, part of Dream Property, a long-term observation on the city's photograph of forest-like landscape that was cut through by a newly built road waiting to be transformed. This photograph is printed on a delicate 70-gram bamboo paper, and the image is pinned on top corners only to allow it to float in the space, reflecting the transient nature of the depicted landscape. In Saturn Sunset 2018, which is part of the Sunset Trilogy, the work features a video taken of a drone flight from an unfinished tower caused by the 97 economic crash. The video captured from the start a scene of a drone lifting off from what seems like a penthouse surrounded by several broken classical order poles. The drone gradually moves slowly out into open air towards the horizon during the sunset before flying back to the tower as the dawn set in. Next is Sunset on Unnamed Lanes 2020. The series depicts a picture of sunset scene taking the organic pathway developed over many decades in the city's largest slum without the intervention of a structured urban planning. Our eyes are drawn to the dark sky that can be found through the spaces between the tin roofs at the narrow space that the viewer is facing. These daily routes remain uncharted on popular apps such as Google Maps, despite Google already charting the bottom part of the seabed. Second aspect of my work explore photography in an image-rich world. In the last 2 decades, we saw rapid changes in technology with the advent of the smartphone and high-speed internet, resulting in proliferation of images through multiple creation and sharing. Photography has always been closely linked with technology, and since the 60s, the revolution within photography was essentially of speed. The affordable SLR system by the like of Nikon F offer multiple range of lenses, durable, portable, and fast operation. And compared to the cumbersome medium and large format system. And this is highlighted in Nikon F being used by astronauts in the space station and photojournalists covering the Vietnam War period, example which are displayed in living pictures. In that sense, the speed has been an integral part of photography, and within the last decades, the nature of speed has multiplied significantly. It began in 2007 when the smartphone became mainstream with the advent of iPhone, a device with a capable camera coupled with high-speed internet, enabling anyone with a device to share the photograph instantly to a wider audience through social media sites such as Flickr, Twitter, Instagram, resulting in the creation and proliferation of images that have not been encountered before. And Thai politics number 2 and number 4.1 and 4.2, as featured in living pictures, are part of this exploration. Thai politics does not represent a definitive timeline of the Thai political landscape. It's more of my attempt to make sense of myself as a photography student from the early 2000s, transitioning period from digital from film to digital sensor, as digital quality become better and more widely accepted in the commercial art sphere. The series began by focusing on peripheral visual nouns within the Thai political landscape. These objects or subjects often appear to have less visual prominence or importance within the media. The series consists of a collection of these visual nouns which are compiled and archived through a DIY publication. And for the ease of distribution, the books were printed inexpensively at a local laser printer, popular with university students photocopying academic texts or printing their dissertation. Sometimes the color, contrast, or finishing of the books differ, but that's also add to the charm to the book as an object, making every edition of the print uniquely different. You can see some of this after the talk. The first series of Thai politics, titled Thai Politics #1, was created in 2006 using a compact film camera. For this series, I used a 1600 ISO Fuji Neoplan black and white film, known with high contrast and large chaotic film grain in order to achieve that kind of gritty black and white image in the style of traditional street photography. The work serves as a reflection at a period when film's camera were being replaced by digital sensor. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to scan and edit this film properly, so in my subsequent work, I tended to use digital camera whenever possible. Next is Thai Politics #2, 2011, which is part of Living Pictures. Thank you. It is an archive of Photoshop images that reimagine Thaksin Shinawatra during the time when he fled Thailand in a multiverse of global and local pop landscape. Images were collected from Thaksin Where Are You Facebook group that no longer exists. The collection of these memes present an early example of the usage of viral and satirical humor, which were widely shared through a major social media platform, thereby allowing a wider discussion on the political issue in the early 2000s. The idea of the book came after the Facebook group had disappeared, either because it had been reported or the moderator decided to shut it down. This made me think about the ephemeral nature of digital and online images. We often assume that images will remain forever on the web. However, a site can be shut down as a result of shifting user trends, technological advancement, and the costs associated with maintaining them. Prime example of these are GeoCity and Flickr, both of which were significant platforms for online photo blogging during the late 90s and early 2000s. GeoCity had completely phased out, while Flickr significantly downsized itself in response to other major sharing sites. On occasion, we may lose our phone or forget our passwords. This too results in a loss of a large chunk of our history. And we are living in this paradox where news images have been made in the last couple of decades since the beginning of smartphone compared to the rest of human history. And yet there's no safety net for these images that in the future may act as a reflection of certain moment in history. Thai Politics #3, 2011, took me back to the street. These are images taken of the face election poster dotted along Bangkok's pavement. The damaged poster revealed intense frustration between opposing supporters of Yingluck Shinawatra Pheu Thai Party and Apisit Vechachiwa Democrat Party during the election campaign. Another series on display at NGS is Thai Politics number 4.1 and 4.2, 2014 as well. This body of work comprises a series of 108 images featuring supporters of the People Democratic Reform Committee. And given that the Thai have always been avid social media user with Siam Paragon, a shopping center in Bangkok at one point being the most tagged place in 2013. I decided that instead of physically going out to capture the protests, I searched online for beautiful and handsome protesters through publicly available online platform and web boards. The work was created during the height of the selfie era, assuming that a plateau had already been reached. Interestingly, the following year, Kim Kardashian releases her magnum opus, a thick pocket-sized book titled Selfish in 2015. This book showcased a collection of hundreds of her own selfie taken over the years, effectively cementing the selfie phenomenon within the mainstream pop culture. It's actually, it hasn't got a good rating on Amazon, and I was wondering if it's some sort of resistance by the designer who tend to cut her pictures out through the way the book has been buying. I'm not sure, it's just my guess. Next is Thai Politics number 5, 2014, which brought me back to the physical world, where I captured 84 images of tent during the PDRC hashtag Occupy Bangkok campaign. These campsites and tents emerged on the city roads, pavement, and parks, creating a period of strange and surreal appearances to the cityscape. And, photographs in the series were taken in a vertical aspect to suit the intended book format. Taken during the nationwide curfew following General Prayut coup on May 23, 2014, Thai Politics number 6 include 3 photographs of a closed 7-Eleven stores, an uncommon sight as these stores usually operate 24 hours a day and are a common feature in the urban landscape. Due to the curfew restrictions, I was only able to capture 3 stores as people were prohibited from traveling during that time. Thai Politics number 7, 2014 is a collaborative photograph sharing project consisting of 26 images. These photographs depict military television broadcasts which were made compulsory across all Thai channels in the period following the coup. The photographs were taken by online contacts during the curfew restriction and submitted through social media platforms. Thai Politics number 8.1, 2016 is an interactive emoticon sticker book containing screenshots of General Prayut daily television broadcast. This book is child-friendly and allows each family member to express their emotion towards General Prayut through the use of the emoticon stickers. You can see his rating. And most recently, Thai Politics number 9, 2019, presents a collection of images sourced from the internet of General Prayut greeting world leaders at the ASEAN Summit. I found like a I Love General Prayut Facebook group, and this is where he's proudly meeting up with all the world leaders. So over the years, my interest has revolved around the ephemeral, encompassing both virtual and the physical objects. I am interested in the transient nature of the everyday, things that exist briefly and may not initially appear worthy of collection or photographing. Examples of such can be found in the following. Excerpt taken from Bangkok Real Estate Advertising 2016 is a collection of short-lived advertising taglines found on the street of Bangkok and in the web. The Bangkok real estate market was booming pre-COVID, fierce competition leading to high turnover of condos and the creation of often exuberant advertising taglines aimed at capturing the attention of potential customers. I photograph and screen cap these advertising texts found in the street and web and transform them into a poem book in a similar way into the classic Penguin book as an ode to the city. For this publication, I used an imported European paper stock to achieve a tactile experience similar to that of a classic Penguin book. Eric in Bangkok 2018 is a book that sourced online images through public search of Eric Cantona on his visit to Thailand during the Thai New Year in April 2018. And for a reader of certain age, you will recognize that Eric Cantona as a Manchester United football player, a living legend known by his fan as King Eric. He's still widely adored and worshipped with followers in Thailand, finding Facebook clue to track him down for the King's signature in once-in-a-lifetime photography experience with King Eric himself. The book is printed and designed in the same manner as the Thai Politics series. A Convenient Hold-Up 2019 is a collection of 155 found images of depicting convenience store attack all over Thailand, accompanied by a sensationalized headline. These images were predominantly sourced from the website of national and regional tabloids. They mainly consist of grainy CCTV footage capture from shop monitors or photographs of the crime scene taken by news photographers. The nature of this crime is relatively minor, as convenience store primarily stock basic and affordable items. As a result, these stories and headlines usually serve as fillers in a never-ending news stream between celebrity gossip and showbiz news. And the collection of books, which include A Convenient Sunset, were printed at an offset printer that made catalogs for the likes of IKEA, using the same stock of paper, whilst A Convenient Hold-Up, which contains CCTV images, uses a more disposable, less refined paper. My current work, which is on in Bangkok right now, is Bliss. Bliss continued my long-term interest in the intervention of man-made landscape and the effect of photography with technology. The work was inspired by one of the most viewed photographs called Bliss by Charles O'Rear, which served as an official Windows XP wallpaper. Bliss employed generative AI techniques that interpret text, images, and sound to explore the life of an image and what makes it iconic. It incorporates range of medium, including digital and film, moving images, voice cloning, hand-pulled screen print, archival and found images from the web. Through this diverse approach, it attempts to explore questions around authorships, the biased gaze of technology, the search for an ideal, and the shifting nature of physicality in an increasingly digital age. And this is part of my voice cloning.
A lone tree in the middle of a green field. The matte painting by Thomas Galambos, Color Field, Flickr Contest winner, Belvier, Windows Vista, Windows XP. A digital painting by Stanley Twardovich. The painting of a green field with a blue sky in the background, Color Field, Painterly, Fixabay Contest winner, Windows Vista, Windows XP. A painting of a green field with a blue sky in the background. A digital painting by Stanley Twardovich, Fixabay Contest winner, Color Field.
Yeah, that was my part of the voice cloning and how AI interpret certain texts and images. And so in summary, these are my main interests. And after experiencing the exhibition of living pictures with Thai politics, I believe there are a couple of afterthoughts, particularly in terms of the image-rich world we currently inhabit. How do we make sense of the visual culture, photographs and short snippets of moving images that are not only prevalent, but also fleeting in nature? The technological advancement of generative AI further blurs the line between fact and fiction, creating another layer of challenge. The intention behind photographs and video can be less clear when images are freely circulating across different platforms and contexts. In such a scenario, what factors should be considered important when anyone can be a producer with a smartphone and share to their countless followers? And what role should museum play in determining what to collect and what is worth collecting? Thank you.
So thank you to both Wawi and Miti for that wonderful presentation. I'm just going to ask a few questions, maybe first with Miti, after he's done taking a break with a drink. Before coming back to Wawi, I just want to ask you very quickly also, because we have with us, physical copies. If you haven't seen me raising my arms already, we have some physical copies of Miti's books here, which you're welcome to browse after the talk. And so with that, I wanted to, oh yes, no Kim Kardashian though. So it's just gonna be Miti's works. Earlier in your presentation, you spoke a lot about photography and its history being one of increasing speed. I'm wondering also in your own practice, given that you do produce a number of works in these formats of photozines, where do you see these books in relation to this narrative and history of speed? What do these photozines do for you that is perhaps different from, seeing prints in a gallery space or even on social media itself? Yeah.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, it started from Thai politics #2. It wasn't my intention at first to be making a book, but after witnessing how images can just disappear completely out of nowhere, I realized that it's quite important to have something as a physical object, and it doesn't need to be printed to a high quality kind of like a museum grade or gallery grade, but more to the point where the work can also be distributed kind of freely as well. And I think in another sense, by making the book, sort of attempting to slow everything down and to have these images in different contexts and more time to sort of think and ponder about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say the title of today's session, Images on the Run, was really kind of, in fact, a kind of tongue-in-cheek, because I was kind of really amused by the fact that whenever visitors come into Living Pictures, they often have to find where is Thaksin. He's like this fugitive on the run, even in the series itself, which led me to think a lot about images and circulation, but then not just of subjects like Thaksin, but even the photographer or the artists themselves, right? So it's kind of why I thought about bringing in Wawi also, in thinking about, the kind of places you've been and all the places that your images have been, right? It struck me that it's not quite common. I don't know if it's common. It's fair to say it's common for a Filipino like yourself, Filipina, sorry, to be, in the places that we've gone to, of which includes New York, Madrid, and more recently in Istanbul. Right? I'm wondering, maybe it's a bit more autobiographical, but I wonder if, these contexts and these trajectories and these geographies that you've been to and been showing works at affect your practice in different ways that you would like to share, maybe?
Yes, to elaborate, I wanted to underline this about my practice is that although it draws from the autobiographical, and that's something that is innate with the work, the real gist of it is extracting the experience and transfiguring it. So it doesn't matter if it was me or somebody else that was living it, as long as it was contemplated on. What I meant to say is that the body that was experiencing that is the medium. And Joyce, if you're here, Joyce Taw, she made me realize this. What I was doing is that photography, for all it's been my constant companion and complicit ally for the past 20 years and more, it's not my medium. The medium is my body. Who was that person who was going through those different places and who was going through those experiences as a human, as a woman, as an Asian, all of these things that makes up the multifaceted person is the medium. The camera is the witness. And in fact, it's so mind-boggling that perhaps the people in the audience, maybe I need to remind everybody, I read this, that we don't really get the chance to see ourselves from the point of view of our eyes. So you don't see yourself because your eyes are always out. So who's looking at you? Who could that be? The proxy is the camera. So when you're taking a portrait of yourself, to understand that creature that's yourself, who's that, fantastic multi-celled creature in front of you that is, living and breathing in 2023 but also is very ancient. So all of that, it's a bit metaphysical, but to answer your question, yes, it's autobiographical, but it's not about me. Does that make sense? So there.
I have a question for both of you, which is that the reason why I wanted to also get you to speak about some of your earlier works is not just as an introduction to some of the audiences who may not be familiar, but also to just stress the point that in a lot of ways your practices really began even before 2010, I would say. And the reason why I'm thinking about 2010, I suppose, is because it's the birth of Instagram. Right. Today, I think even when we think about things like self-portraits or selfies that Miti talked about, a lot of this is in a way facilitated and proliferated by Instagram and its algorithms of likes and whatnot. Even right down to the meme of hot girl summer, I suppose, if we go back to that. I wonder, thinking back and now thinking it from the vantage point of 2023, I suppose. How would you like to share, if any way, these kind of platforms, social media has affected your practice in one way or another? That's obviously very different from a century ago where I guess European photographers like Sprache doesn't have any of these kind of platforms. Yeah. Yeah?
I guess because I started photography, I think, same as Wawi, when film was still around. But I think the main thing is with photography, it has always been linked with technology. So, whether it's going through the start of the iPhone and the internet, and now we're actually moving on to, generative AI. I think it's just something that as a photographer or artists who use lens-based media is something that we can think about, and it's at the end of the day, I guess it's a tools, and it's just part of the contemporary culture and the Thai that you can't really fight back. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
So Miti and we are proud Gen Xers, right?
I think
We're
so.
from the good old Gen X, which is, I think, a lucky generation because we were at that 0 point where digital was born. Where digital camera, the internet was new. Internet 1, version 1, we were right there. We were teenagers. And in my school, we had darkroom, but we also had classes on HTML, the beginning of that. So we're actually very comfortable doing this analog and then digital, and then adjusting to whatever the medium is changing. And I guess photography, since we're talking about the exhibition, is that photography would always be contemporary, even if with AI, I think, because there's no other medium that has made a lot of leaps and bounds within 200 years. Not painting, not other mediums. So the tired question, if photography is contemporary art, you can't get any more contemporary than photography. So whether or not Instagram is viable now, we are participants, and all of us here, whether we're the makers of the images or we're consumers of it, we are all part of it. It's our visual culture. And I guess now, because of that, we're more global, we're more in touch than ever before. Yeah. So because of that, we're also very local now, because now they've seen everything from all over the world, and we want to be local as well. So yeah, I guess the more we get more digital, the more we get human in that sense. But there's AI. I'm okay with AI. We are a projector in our eyes too, so it's not just a machine with nothing to be scared about. Yeah.
I don't think we're going to get into a debate on whether AI-generated images are still photography. Maybe
Do the selfie AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, next.
Or if I'm here, or are you here, or a hologram, right? I'm not here. I'm there in the gallery. So that's the function of the photographs also.
Maybe with that, I open up to the floor if there's any question. I mean, I have a couple of more, but if there's anyone with any questions, could you, yeah. Oh, there's a mic coming around the back. Just help raise your hand.
Hi, thank you, both of you. I mean, all three of you, actually. It was really interesting. Wawi, I have a question for you about main Manila. Okay, I understand the importance of the frame, but I wanted to ask inside, like the cat, the gin and tonic, or the vase, you have like, how would we call it, cut and paste or collage? If you want to elaborate a little bit about that, please.
Yes, thank you for bringing up that question. Yeah, so finally I got tired of people asking if my work is digital. Yes, it's digital. And then, is it pure? Is it all of that? Honestly, I'm bored with that, so I just did it. I did rough cuts and pastes, just as you would do with scissors on paper. So if it was not seamless, it's meant to be like that. It meant to show you, yes, this is a constructed image. It was created by a person who thought that this position was better than this, and I cut it up and I put the vase here. And so that it activates your relationship with the image. And then the layer is this photography? So that image will technically be not photography to some people because I touched it. But then I don't think in those things anymore. I just think of myself as a creator who made that image. And so it's a collage in a sense, but it's still based on images. Yes, so fun. It's more fun because we've been seeing photography but seamless, like all of these photoshopped, no, right, Miti? This way of treating the medium. So in fact, I'm just doing something very crude, something very playful.
My question, I think, is something that's very relevant that's been touched on with AI. As photographers, how do you protect the integrity of your work with AI? And do you think photographers could even one day become irrelevant with the more images there are out there, the more subject matter there is for ChatGPT to conjure up an image. So can photographers ever become redundant in that sense?
I think I use it as a tool, and I think that's how it will be. Like that's when Photoshop first came out, or let's actually the beginning of AI remind me of during the 2000 again, when we were at university and Google started to come out with a search that is quite proficient, and it was great because before we had to go to the library to search random books. And now with Google search, it's actually easier. And I think AI will be the same, but just at this moment in time, it's still a bit all over the place. But I think the thing that kind of worry me more is that the use of the generative AI uses a lot of computing powers, which mean that only a handful of companies can actually run it. Like let's say Microsoft bought the OpenAI, right? And now Google, and just only a few big companies are running. And then there's a question of, the people that are designing this, or which we don't know how it works. How does that affect the bias or even the gaze of the AI, which I touches upon in my new work. But I think that's going to be something that's, it's more important than how it's affecting my career as a photography, but more like in more like a social sphere. Yeah.
I think yes, you have a point. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. But that in relation to photography, my thinking is that there's a risk there that our perception of reality might slip, because there's a lot of AI now that seems real, and our reality is being questioned, our perception of reality is slipping. Then what would that entail? What is that's something to be cautious of. And since I'm working with identity, and that is almost something double-edged, because yes, I'm always the one in front of the camera. It's my countenance and shape. But then what if that is stolen? What if that is taken away? Then what if that belongs to that, shifting, bilocating, copied, reproduced, things like that. So up until I get there, I would rather think positively that it's a tool. And there are photographers right now who are doing well with actually demonstrating this is what we can do with AI, generative photography, using prompts and all that. And I think we will move along as time always does to us. Having the conversations is important, I guess. And always just taking care of our securities in that sense, that we don't let it slip without our noticing.
It's probably more of a problem with like Illustrator, because people with like real identity in their work, which now can be copied within 5 seconds or whatever the time it takes. So for those guys, it's a real worry. I mean, I would be worried, but I think for my line of work, I guess it's more as a creative tools. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty worrying.
I can just answer that. Thank God I'm not a photographer, so I don't have to think about those. But that's also a caveat to say that I think museums and curators have to start thinking when, I think it will be a threshold when museums and institutions start collecting, I think, AI-generated images. I'll just say a quick note is that I'm on the fence in the sense that I don't think the sort of concern with AI-generated images should be based on this question of authenticity, because the history of photography is also a history of photo manipulation in one way or another. What is interesting that AI brings then is that how do you decenter the history of photography from strictly humanistic concerns? Because there is an account of photography that goes beyond the human. And what's also, maybe to come back to maybe the way that Miti works, and also something that Wawi addressed, is also, I think the tricky bit for me as a curator then is, when you look at the AI images, it's obviously these references and visual forms come from somewhere, whether it's crawling through the internet for this space, in the same way that Wawi mines, all these references based on the places she's been. All these elements in her work come from somewhere. Same thing we could say about AI, but the tricky thing would be it's harder and harder and muddier to see how many degrees of that reference point is lost, and at its time you end up with something that looks vaguely believable, but you don't know where these references are from. They come from somewhere, of course. They are encoded with certain values and biases in all the way that all algorithms are. But then how do you define where the reference point and these value judgments that are implicitly embedded in them? I think that would be the problem. But thankfully, I'm not a photographer, so. Yeah, we have, we have 2 more from the front. Rose has the mic, I think, yep.
Thanks so much for the wonderful presentation, such a privilege. I have a question for maybe both of you or whoever wants to take it. We talked a lot about the state of being a peripatetic artist, a cosmopolitan artist, and kind of framed it as a way of seizing power as a photographer from the 1800s when it was European photographers taking images of the region, right? So that was the framing. But have either of you met photographers who are very concerned with being provincial and local, and who refuses cosmopolitanism? And if so, how do you see yourself and your work in relation to those artists, your peers? Is there a huge difference? Do they see things that you don't? Do they see things differently from you? Or do you feel like photography is just inherently cosmopolitan?
I think my grandfather was, because he's a photographer in a small town, and he worked every day of his life doing photography, taking photographs of everyone in that town, from the graduation photos to school, to weddings, to funerals. Yeah, massive, like a history of that town. And he never went out, not even to Manila. And I would guess that because of that, that he has made a practice that is deep and not scattered. Because the challenge for us now, who has done this trajectory of kind of, let's say, coming of age into the art world, you know, your education and then the grants and the scholarships and all of that. You get to see the world, and nothing, that's the best education also, just traveling, right? But it's true, there's confusion as well, that you are, what am I going to say after seeing all of this? Especially after New York, I thought about that everything has been done. So what to do? The pictures generation, they did that already. The conceptual artists, they did that already. So in the end, all of that is just so that you can unlearn it. It's a bit strange. You have to go through that so that you can unlearn it. Whereas the one who didn't do it and just happily stayed at home or in the home city would be developing something much more, I guess, more concentrated and more intuitive and more folk and more. I kind of see it as they're the caretakers of that local culture that is essential in order to keep your identity intact, I guess. Because after all the acculturation, there's a contamination that you cannot take away anymore. Yeah, I think Singaporeans I would want to ask that to a Singaporean, right? Because you travel a lot, I think, more than I guess.
I'm a homeboy, so. Yeah, I think Singapore's a bit.
Singaporean photography. Let's narrow it down. Like there are Singaporean photographers.
Well, there are better people in the audiences
There.
who might address that better than I can. But I mean, just to quickly answer to Take's question, I think it's also, I mean, even if you have a photographer, I believe, or an artist who somehow, I guess, practice and imagery is very rooted in some kind of local/provincial reference point. I think the question then would be to the museum and the curators, because it's not just whatever that he or she is producing, right? It's the reception of these images. Where do they go? If they stay, like Wawi said, in the small town where her grandfather was working, they probably remain that way. But what happens when a traveling curator on a holiday goes to that small town, sees it, brings it back, justifies it being in a show like Living Pictures, and then it gains this kind of regional, if not international circulation, then what happens? Like, even if something that's supposedly rooted in a local provincial context, then it gets received differently. And so I think that question is not just to artists, but also a kind of judgment call, I suppose, on curators. And yeah, sure.
Yeah, the curator is very important, but also I take back a little bit what I said, that when you say provincial, it doesn't mean pure. Because we're always mediated. Like even, I guess, that province, they would have magazines of life, magazine. And they're looking at the lens of another ideal, So even if, I guess, those who haven't studied photography formally, they would have studied it either on the internet, I'm talking about the recent generation, or their heroes in photography. Like I would say that in the Philippines, we have a strong affinity for the black and white, Daido Murayama, there's no official photography school in Manila, but this is like the pervading look when you say the Filipino photographers who've taken up the medium. It doesn't mean that because they stayed there and didn't do the artistic trajectory that they're not being educated in a sense that their eyes are looking at a certain ideal, like the Japanese gritty, black and white, very male, very street. It's also acquired because of the proliferation of books that surrounded them. Yeah. So then I don't know if that's, yeah, an entry level, because we're looking at images, no matter what we like it or not, right?
I guess it's hard to be, truly local these days, just because, as you say, with photography books and everything, there's we get so many influences from everywhere, and the internet, and it just is unavoidable that ideas and visual cultures sort of share and maybe becoming a bit more unified. But even with photographer artists, that they might say they're doing something very local, but I still believe that there's a lot of link that somehow link them to let's say my work could be linked to yours, or yeah.
When they saw my self-portraits, they always compared it. It's like a Diane Arbus. Well, when I was studying, the reference is always somewhere that's not within Asia, because that's the material that we had. We didn't have any books. So this exhibition with living pictures is like all of us who's been doing photography, finally we'd have something to refer to in a compendium, because otherwise everything else has not been done before. I mean, compiled from Asia. If you ask somebody, who's your favorite photographer from Bangkok or from Thailand? Miti, right? Who's your favorite? Yeah, so it's just here I'm talking about education. Now that we have references to point to, let's say, okay, the 300 artists, 300 works. 300 works in living pictures. That's a good amount to start with. Whereas when I was studying in the late 90s, they always showed me Andy Warhol, who else? Diane Arbus, Jeff Wall. And I'm like, what do I have to do with them? And then I just liked how it looked like. So it's nice to actually see that within the region, it's very active. And we have something to refer to and to have actual names to say. Yeah.
Someone raised a hand earlier? Right.
Just quickly, Wawi, you started your talk by talking about the plurality of identity, and I wonder how you conceptualize that. Do you see, in terms of the influences on identity, do you see that as something that layers over time, or more like a cake mixture where it all kind of like mixes together? How do you kind of conceptualize that? If you had to kind of think how the influences on identity kind of come together, do they just mix into something new, or do they retain their?
I think it's a process of blending and referring to what is similar and what is acquired. What is similar, meaning that I could easily say that in Southeast Asia, we have like a common thing for fabrics. We have a common tradition for artisanal work of hands. Anyway, so I think the way that I understand you, the layers and layers of identity is memories of yourself as a person, childhood, growing up, and then the places. The places is not just geography, but it's also culture. What they eat there, how they do things differently than back home. What is their how you say, local, let's just say in Istanbul, in Turkey, it's like totally new. And then what was my point of reference first was Byzantium, which is way coming from Manila, Philippines, it's stuff that I've read in the Bible that it's like layers of these things that I didn't know, or I knew as a mythic place. I knew it as a mythic, imaginative location. And then when you're actually there, you're hearing it, you're sensorially feeling it because you're there. So it somehow just sticks to you by understanding what you find strange or what you find fascinating. I think those two are very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna close the session by maybe asking one last question, since I have the privilege as moderator. Um, I'm gonna ask to both Miti and Wawi, just a very simple question really, but I think it really speaks to some of the topics that we're discussing, as well as the last section of Living Pictures called Contemporary Imaginations, if you haven't been, which is, I'm just gonna ask, what is the last image you uploaded onto the internet? This is a safe space, I assure you, I think. Yeah. This could be on social media, it could be even, I would count email. That's the internet.
I reshared Miti's story about this talk today. That's that.
That's it, yeah.
That's it. In here.
That was the one I was hoping.
What did you upload?
I think I uploaded images of my breakfast. Yeah, that's how banal I am these days. Yeah, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. If you haven't been, I just want to give a quick shout out. Living Pictures is viewable once you go directly above us to level 3. So just climb up the stairs if you're not. And yeah, feel free to come down to browse books that Miti has kindly brought over from Bangkok in his luggage. And you just come and say hi to us. The show is ongoing until August. Yeah, so if you have time, please come back for repeated visits. And we should have more programs in the coming weeks and months. With that, please join me in thanking our 2 special guests for today. Thank you.